You're listening to Simple Health Radio, the podcast about recognizing medical emergencies and promoting wellness. Your host is Dr. Emron, an experienced ER physician who has treated thousands of people just like you. Information on the show is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Always talk to your doctor or go to the nearest emergency room with any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of Simple Health Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Emron. On today's episode, we will be talking about a lab test called the CMP. The full name is Comprehensive Metabolic Panel. So the Comprehensive Metabolic Panel, CMP, is a very common lab test. This is ordered in a lot of physician offices, hospitals, and emergency departments all over the world. There are different parts of the CMP, and I thought this would be a good opportunity for me just to break down some of the details so that I can help to clarify points and questions that people often have. Now, on a previous episode, I had talked about the CBC. The CBC is a complete blood count. That one is a completely different test. That actually measures the white blood cells, hemoglobin, which measures anemia, and the platelets, which are important markers for our coagulopathy or ability to clot. The CMP is completely different from a CBC. There are different groups of labs that we order, and because it's a comprehensive panel, that's why it's oftentimes used in different settings, even in people who are completely healthy. It can be used as a screening test, but it's very important in people who are either unhealthy in the emergency department or who have already been admitted to the hospital, and we are trying to determine, are they getting better, are they getting worse, or are there some other factors that we might be overlooking? Now, one of the most important tests in the CMP is the glucose. Glucose is a sugar. Glucose comes from the foods that we eat, and some of it is actually produced by the liver as well. Now, as most people know, diabetes is an elevated blood glucose level. Glucose is required by the body because it's an energy source, and the brain relies exclusively on glucose for a majority of its function. So the body actually wants to keep the glucose high. However, when it's very, very elevated, as in diabetes or in other types of infections, it does have some side effects. So the glucose is one of the major numbers that we look for on a CMP. Calcium is another number that we measure. It's a mineral, which is important for muscles, nerves, and the heart in order to properly balance and function. Either low calcium or too high calcium values can actually cause major issues. Now, the CMP can also measure protein. So proteins come in several types. Some proteins are from the foods that we consume, and other proteins are actually produced by the liver. The albumin is a small protein that's produced by the liver, and it helps us to measure if a person is doing well in terms of their energy consumption, in terms of their calorie intake, or if they're actually losing protein in the body. Electrolytes are the next category of the CMP, and these include sodium, potassium, chloride, and CO2. So again, electrolytes are sodium, potassium, chloride, and CO2, also called carbon dioxide. As most people know, these are found in the foods that we eat, and they are very, very important for all cell metabolism and functioning. This includes the way that nerves communicate with other parts of the body, but also how the blood, the serum, the plasma, which are all different parts of the liquid portion of the body, need to interact with the muscles, the bones, and solid organs. Now, in a previous episode, we had talked about hyponatremia, which was low sodium in the blood. And if you recall, that was a lab test that I ordered on a person who came into the ER having multiple falls. They became very dizzy. So in that case, the CMP was the first test that I ordered, and we were able to identify the location and the source of the problem very quickly. So again, the electrolytes are sodium, potassium, chloride, and CO2. The CMP also gives us a lot of information about the kidney function. The kidneys, most people have two, some people can have one, and some people require dialysis or they have kidney failure and they may require a transplant. But the way that we measure kidneys' function or the ability to filter the urine out of the blood is by a number called a creatinine. So creatinine is actually a waste product made by the muscles, which is then filtered from the blood out through the kidneys, and it converts into a special chemical that we can actually detect. Creatinine, everyone makes it every day because it is a waste product. However, if the kidneys cannot clear it out of the blood quickly enough, it will build up rapidly in the blood. So when we measure the CMP, if the creatinine level is very, very high, we automatically know there's something going on with the kidneys, meaning they can't filter out the blood quickly enough, or there could be a problem with the muscles, where the muscles may have broken down, caused excessive waste product. Now, there are different situations where that may occur. So as we mentioned with kidney disease, it could be linked with diabetes, could be linked with high blood pressure, could be linked with a medication side effect, which is stressing the kidneys, causing the creatinine to elevate. However, the opposite is also true, meaning the muscles could be the source of a large amount of creatinine because if someone is, for example, in a car accident, or they do heavy lifting at work, or they're in an earthquake and their body is crushed under some heavy concrete for many, many hours, it is possible that their muscles will break down so much the creatinine numbers will be very, very high. Even though the kidney is functioning as best as it can, the numbers are going to continue to elevate. And so that's why the creatinine actually gives us both sides of the equation. Is the kidney okay, or are the muscles producing too much creatinine, and it guides us on what to do next. Another portion of that is the BUN, called the blood urea nitrogen. This is the second part of the measurement of the kidneys, because urea is a byproduct that we don't want in the body. It's actually toxic, and that is where the name urine comes from. So urea in the blood is never a good thing. We're trying to filter that out as quickly as possible through the kidneys. And then the last group of tests that we can measure with the CMP are going to be for the liver. There are several different names. The most common names that we use now are ALT, AST, ALP, and bilirubin. So there's a lot of acronyms, but basically these are all what we call liver function tests. The liver itself, if you can see by my conversation, has so many different functions. It's estimated it has 400 different metabolism or other digestive functions in the body that we know of. There may be more that are out there that will be discovered, but there's at least 400 that we know of. In the CMP, we measure the four most common. So if the numbers that we just talked about for the liver function are high, we automatically know there is some stress to the liver. Now, this could be something temporary, for example, food poisoning. It could be some type of mild infection or fever that's stressing the liver, causing the numbers to be a little high. It can also occur from an overdose. For example, some people may overdose on Tylenol, or they may overdose on painkillers, either intentionally or by accident. And we can actually measure the liver function in those cases. And then there's hepatitis. Hepatitis has different types. There's hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. But ultimately, hepatitis means there's swelling of the liver due to an infection or inflammation. And this is the number one way that we detect that initially, especially in people who may not be having any symptoms. They may be alcoholic. They may be going through some other drug abuse or other issues. So we need to have a rapid way of assessing that. So the CMP, as we just talked about, there's at least 12 or 13 different numbers that we can get just from one panel. Now the question comes up, why do we do a panel? Why do you have to go through all these numbers all at the same time? Well, one of the reasons is cost. So if we ordered each of these tests that we talked about one by one, it would actually cost more money to the patient and the insurance company. Doing it as a panel is fast. It's very rapid. Many clinics have machines now in their office where they take a small sample of blood, and within 15 minutes, they can actually get a printout. Before, it would take days, meaning people would draw blood in the clinic, send it out to a courier overnight. They would get the results back the following day. Then they would try to call the patient back. And during that time, the patient may actually get worse. And so we're very fortunate that the panel, the CMP that's available, allows us to get a rapid amount of information in a very, very short amount of time. Now, I always advise people to keep copies of their medical records, including their lab studies, because it's very helpful. If you end up getting sick with something down the road, or if you have to get any kind of surgery, there is a preoperative clearance. For example, if someone's going to have gallbladder surgery, if they're going to have a C-section, if they're going to have a hysterectomy, the surgeon wants to make sure that the liver and kidneys are functioning well, make sure the person is not diabetic, make sure that they can reduce any risk factors before they go under anesthesia. So the CMP has a very large amount of utility. It's very beneficial for the doctors who are involved in the care, and it's very important for the patient to understand those numbers. I hope you learned a little bit about the CMP lab test today. If you have questions about that, or if you have some own experience about this lab test or other similar lab tests, send us a message. We do have a LinkedIn page. You can just search for Simple Health Radio. We have a large number of followers, over 3,000 on LinkedIn, and many of them do send us feedback about their experiences. I would look forward to having you on my show on a future episode if you have some topics related to this or other ideas. And I do thank you for joining me today, and I hope you'll join me again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Visit simplehealthradio.com to read the blog, follow links mentioned on this episode, and easily share content with your family and friends. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and the 3 and Out Radio Network. Be sure to connect with Dr. Emron on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Tumblr to send us your questions and ideas.